can't hear Julius.
Oops! Wow, we have two technical issues in the span of 2 minutes. Hey everyone, welcome to GDG Singapore's second round of Project Rework. We are super excited to have you all here today. There's supposed to be a music in the intro, but for some reason, some of the... What? See, there's something wrong. So anyway, so we're gonna have Chris Haag today in our event. As you all might know, in our advertisement, he's the VP of Engineering at Salesforce. But before that, we'll pass it on to Jasin to share a bit about Google Developer Space.
Yep. Thanks, Julius. Thanks everyone for joining us. I see a lot of comments saying good morning to all of us already. Yeah, we hope everyone is having a great Saturday as well. And I'm Jiaxing from the Google Developer Relations team. So before we begin today's session organized by GDG Singapore, let me just briefly introduce what Google Developer Space does. So we are a platform for developers and startups from around the region to learn and connect with one another. It's actually a physical space in the Google Singapore office, but I think due to COVID, everyone knows that all the offline events have gone virtual. So we have gone virtual as well. And as part of the developer relations team, we aim to empower and connect the community to one another. And we are really looking forward to today's session organized by Julius and Wei Yuan from GDG Singapore. Really looking forward to what Chris will be sharing with us. So yeah, over to Julius and Wei Yuan to share more.
All right. So again, we'd like to introduce Chris. He'll be speaking to us in a few moments. But before that, I wanted to thank all the committees that actually have shared our events, Philippines, Kuala Lumpur, Baguio, everything. Thank you so much for being part of this initiative. We hope that we are able to serve you more. And if you have any topics that you're interested in and would like to partner with us, feel free to reach us at this email address. Likewise, we love followers. More followers makes us more happy. So if you haven't subscribed yet or followed us in Facebook, please do so. We look forward to talk to you and interact with you more.
Yep. So same for developer space. So these are all the channels that you can find us at: our website, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. So yeah, we collaborate with a lot of communities to host events like this. So if you are interested, do subscribe to our YouTube as well.
And yeah, so for this event, it's actually being streamed right now to GDG Singapore, but also to Google Developer Space as well as GDG Philippines. So hi to the audience over there across this region. Hope you guys will enjoy this event today. And in the coming month, we have events, very exciting events that are coming up. So definitely look out for our different social channels for more updates. We're going to have Prasad, who's going to be speaking with us in terms of his topic, lessons learned from Google People Operations team in terms of working better together. So very exciting topic. Definitely look out for the updates on that one and also the date of the event itself, 20th of March. And yeah, in March is going to be a whole range of celebrations in regards to IWD. I think for Google Developer Space as well, they're going to have many different events celebrating this hallmark event itself. And we're going to have a couple of events with very interesting speakers who are going to be sharing with us their experiences in regards to their workplace and their leadership experiences related to our current event string of events such as the one we have today as well. So definitely look out for that. So in April, more in March and April period actually. Yeah. So give more updates on that in our social in time to come. And for some of you who have been with us for the good half of last year, we do have seen more of our events where we actually invited Bruce from Netflix to speak with us in terms of his leadership experiences in his company. And we're very excited to have him back again, for a second iteration, a different topic this time. So definitely look out for that. This is going to happen on the 17th of April, coming in 2 months from now. And as always, we are always very, very excited to have new speakers step up from a community to share about their experiences, be it something they have done at work that you want to share with all of us, or be it it's a side project that you're doing, it's something that no one has done before. We really want to put you in the limelight, get you your voice out there, share the knowledge with everyone else. So if you are interested, do sign up at this link over here. This shortened link bit.ly/GDG-SGCFP. Okay, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. And as always, for all events that we host, it's always better, to have sponsors. They allow us to do more things, get more resources to deliver, get our more speakers from different regions as well, and also to be able to do more things. So yes, thanks to our sponsor for this event, Harbor. So Harbor, I think for some of you all might know that the company has been sponsoring us for a couple of events since I think in December or early November of last year. So we're very happy to have them join us again in terms of bringing forth this event to all of you. And without further ado, I think let's shift the attention over to our speaker for today. So welcome, Chris.
Thank you. I am very excited to virtually be here.
Awesome. So I think let's get started.
Great. Well, let me first just remind everyone that you can ask questions through the live stream. Do know that there's about a 30-second delay between when you put the question in and when we're able to see it. And also know that our plan is to take your questions as we go. Feel free to put them in. And then when I finish the prepared part of my content, we will go through the questions, as many as we can. All right. I'm going to start with a tradition that I've learned at Salesforce. I've been working at Salesforce now about a year, and one part of the Salesforce culture that I really like is we always start our presentations off with gratitude. So let me start by thanking Julius Wee for giving me the opportunity to speak this morning, obviously evening my time. I want to thank my mentors. It hopefully is obvious already to all of you, or will be obvious to all of you, that I didn't come up with this out of thin air. I am indebted to many a mentor over the years. And then lastly, I want to thank you. This content all exists as a blog post I wrote on Medium, and I have never tried to present it as a presentation. So thank you for being my guinea pigs. And feel free to find me on LinkedIn and hit me up with any feedback at the end, critical or positive. I would love some ideas on how to make this content better as a presentation. It's kind of fun to be talking to Singapore in this exact February, because just a few weeks ago, my great grand boss, Mr. Mark Benioff, was in Singapore at the company kickoff, kind of getting us all fired up for the next year. Singapore is a place I have stopped through on the way to Kuala Lumpur, but I've never actually visited, and it looks lovely. I hope someday to visit. As you hopefully already know, my name is Chris Haag. I am one of the many VPs of software engineering at Salesforce. Thought I'd introduce myself just kind of briefly at the beginning. I've been working in Silicon Valley for more than 20 years. I've been leading people since about 2007. So that's 14 years, going on 14 years now. I spent most of the last 10 years doing product engineering at startups, building data science enabled products in the business to business space. I'm also a dad. I'm an amateur saxophone player, and you may hear my dog do some barking because this is COVID, and of course I'm at home. I thought I run a team of about 50 people. Here's a few of the members on my team. Among many things, we are focused on using data science and automation to plot a course that will enable Salesforce to run deliver our products on top not only of our own data centers, but at Amazon, at Azure, and at GCP. And doing it at a scale that will handle the scope of our business over the next coming decade. Our belief is that we can create basically fully autonomous capacity and cost management for my company. And it is I will say, a very interesting set of challenges. So before I get into managing high and low performers, I want to start by asking, why do we even pay attention to this? Why do we invest this time? Why do it at all? And before I answer that question, what is it even that we're talking about with working with high and low performers? Well, the category, at least as I've heard it described here in Silicon Valley, is performance management, meaning work we do as leaders to improve the performance of the individuals on our team and to improve the performance of our teams with the goal of creating very high performance teams. And I thought it might be fun, before jumping into my content, to ask, how much time should we spend on performance management? Because we have a host of things that we need to stay on top of as leaders. How do we decide whether we're doing enough performance management or maybe too much? Well, I'm going to offer a mental model that I use to think about this question and questions like it. And I often find with mental models, it's helpful to start with boundary conditions. So in this case, when would I do no performance management? And maybe when would I do nothing but performance management? Well, say on the when would I do no performance management, I can think of two clear scenarios that have maybe sometimes happened in my experience where I'm not really doing any performance management. One example I will give, and this is a saying that I've heard: when the Titanic started to sink, the captain did not call a meeting. Similarly, if you're running a team and things are really, really not going well, probably performance management slips to the bottom of your priority list. You're just trying to dig yourself out of a hole. On a more positive note, I've also had the occasion to start a team from scratch and really hire people I've worked with for a long, long time, just the most senior, best people I know. Basically, creating a high performance team that really doesn't need a lot of performance management. So there's one boundary condition. Is there ever a time I could imagine in my role as an engineering leader doing nothing but performance management? The answer is no. Like, you think about that list I put out there, you can't drop those things. So that maybe already starts to give me a sense that, like, if sometimes we do none of it and we'd never do 100% of it, probably the right amount is somewhere between 0 and, a quarter of our time. But so how much is enough? How much is too much? Well, of course, I'm going to tell you the answer is contextual, which I know isn't super helpful, but I'll try to give kind of one other way I think of this. A lot of what leaders do, especially in engineering and maybe in lots of other disciplines, is figure out that balance of tactical and strategic work. In product engineering, the balance between focusing on getting some change, some new feature, some product in the customer's hands, this sprint, this month, versus investing in work that will improve our ability to deliver high quality features to our customers next month. Basically, those investments in the future productivity is the classic go slow to go fast. In my experience, most of us tend to err on the side of doing too much to get, this sprint, this month's features out the door, and not enough time preparing to get faster and higher quality in the future. So while I can't tell you how much time you should be spending performance managing, I'm going to guess, those of you who are already people leaders, in my experience, you're probably not doing enough of it. In the same way that your teams are probably not doing enough refactoring, not doing enough test-driven development, not doing enough automation. So wherever you are, I would ask the question of whether maybe you should do a little more so you can be faster down the line. All right, let's get to the content. The first question becomes, why do we even need to worry about high performers, right? Like, they're high performers. They're already killing it. Maybe we could just fire and forget and not worry about it. And I will say, it's easy to get the temptation of saying, why can't they all be high performers? Fortunately, honestly, if they were all high performers, companies wouldn't really need us as much. So maybe it's good that they're not all high performers. It also raises the question, how do we know that they are high performers? Well, let's talk about that for a little bit. First off, experience helps. The more time you spend in this profession, the more time you spend leading people, you will find that you develop an intuitive sense of who's high performing and who isn't. Unfortunately, that's not good enough. You need to have some specific reasons for why you believe your high performers are high performing, both to coach them, because you need specifics, but also, most places you work will have a somewhat structured promotion process, and it's not going to really fly to go and say, I just feel that they're high performers. Well, so all right, how do we do this? Well, let's talk about having a mental model, some framework for thinking this through. First off, performance is always going to be relative to the level of the employee. Obviously, our expectations for a new college grad or a high-performing new college grad are going to be very different than our expectations for a senior engineer who is high-performing. So what I recommend, if you haven't already done this, and if you're at a startup, you may not have, carve out the time, get your team together, and as a group, think through what makes us unique. What is unique about this group of people, and what is unique about the mission we're on as a company? And what does that say about what we value as an engineering team? And what are the specific skills, both technical and soft skills, that we want to have as a team? Just doing this exercise is admittedly taking you away from delivering product, but go slow to go fast. This exercise will have immediate benefits. It will let all of your existing team members kind of self-assess. Where could they grow? Where could they learn from their colleagues? You can also use it in recruiting. Once you've got all this written down, your job descriptions get a lot easier. And during interviews, having this written down is a great way to structure your interview process so you make sure you don't duplicate questions and technical areas, but also make sure you cover them all. Once you've got your values and your competencies defined, then you've got, I will admit, a somewhat tedious task of defining your expectations for each level of employee. For those of you working at large companies, certainly including Salesforce, someone's already done this for me. We have an incredibly detailed and I think really well-written set of expectations across like 8 different dimensions for I think 6 different levels. But I will say at startups, I've always had just 4, or maybe 1. We eventually added a 5th for like principal engineers who were out talking at conferences. It takes some time, but as you will see, I will keep coming back to this notion of expectations per level. Doing the exercise and getting buy-in from the team and from maybe the leadership group will really, really serve you well in working with employees of all levels, both high, low, and everything in between. Another part of your mental model is the classic potential and performance. You need to think about how are they executing relative to your expectations for their level. That's part of your performance evaluation. And then your understanding of potential. Once you've gotten things written down, hopefully ability to execute at level is, if not truly objective, at least something that you can kind of create specific examples of. I expect a level 2 engineer to be able to define an epic in a way that more junior engineers can start to work tasks. And then if someone is struggling, you can say, that doesn't seem like something you can do. Or if you have a new college grad who's already able to do that, you can say, wow, you seem high performing, right? You're performing above our expectations for your level. A brief note about potential. That is a little harder to kind of explain, but at least it's a little fuzzier. But generally, I look for the employees who are out, reading blogs, bringing new ideas to the team, employees who are asking for mentors, employees who are, have that resiliency and that grit, who can have a failure and keep going. Potential is harder to measure, but well worth, thinking through and having an opinion of. Sorry, I'm trying to keep a timer going and it dropped on me. All right, let's think about motivation for high performers. And obviously, a lot of the content I'm going to give about high performers applies to performers of all types. And you might think, wow, well, if it's a high performer, why should I worry about their motivation? In my experience, though, actually, it's very important to check in with your high performers. So let's talk about motivation. Hopefully some of you are familiar with Dan Pink's work. If not, I've got a link here, and I think I'll be able to send the slides out later. He makes a distinction between extrinsic motivators, things like salary, bonus, recognition, having someone praise. These are all extrinsic motivators, and they're nice, but they don't really last. They tend to kind of, they're kind of like empty calories. They're like a sugar high. Whereas intrinsic motivators, this is how we motivate ourselves. And as a leader, you really want to make sure that you are providing opportunities for everyone on your team, but in particular your high performers, to find purpose, mastery, and autonomy. Purpose defined as that mission, like why are we doing this work? What impact am I having? What impact is the team having? What impact is the company having? Am I engaged in it? Can you engage your team in it? The other thing that motivates all of us is learning. Humans are relatively weak when it comes to superpowers. We can't run 70 miles an hour like a cheetah. We can't fly through the air like a bird. But boy, one thing we can do is learn. And this tends to be motivating for most people. So making sure that your culture and the way you structure your teams gives people a chance to learn is super important. And then lastly, the last one is don't micromanage. Make sure your employees, relative to their levels, have a chance to exercise some autonomy and make their own decisions. It's also worth being on the lookout for unhealthy motivators, especially with your high performers. Now, these first two can come in positive forms, but I want to call out with both recognition and winning that when they become someone's purpose, when they become why someone, really, really important to one of your high performers in particular, this can really flip them into being a problem and maybe even arguably a low performer. With recognition, it's when that search to be praised starts to outweigh their commitment to the business and the team. Signs of this include kind of maybe almost sort of stealing credit from others or taking on more than they can handle because they want that recognition. Winning can be a great thing. We all have a sense of competition. We're certainly competing with our business competition. But where winning can go off the rails is when, especially for engineers, when they start to approach a technical discussion with the feeling that they need to win that discussion. That if their idea, if their design doesn't carry the day, they've lost. This can really become a problem, right? You get someone who speaks over others, who doesn't listen, who doesn't build consensus. this can really flip someone and can become an example of one of my favorite quotes, which is, I'd rather have a hole on my team than an asshole. Fear, anxiety, and never enough is I'll end with, this is the most common unhealthy motivator I see, especially in my top performers. And this is where you have an employee who needs external validation that they're doing okay. And the way they get that external validation is through their job. This will cause them to be very deeply identified with their work, will make them very sensitive to criticism, and will also make them very likely to burn out. These type of high performers will often leave you because they'll set themselves up in a situation where they can't keep up with all of their commitments. They feel burnt out. They feel like they're letting people down. They get a job offer, they leave because they think the grass is going to be greener. But what do you know? They will go to that new job and they will recreate the same situation that they were in at your job. As their manager, you want to try to identify this and help them see that their personal value isn't necessarily tied to those outcomes. You'll need to reassure them and help them find, a different sense of ideally intrinsic. You'll notice that these unhealthy motivators are all extrinsic, a more healthy intrinsic motivation. And then just briefly on the high performers, here are some common challenges that I have seen with my high performers. They often have been they've been so good, so talented that they have not had to learn to prioritize till they reach a certain level in their career. They tend to not to like to say no. Again, back to that fear anxiety approach to our work. So you need to teach them how to prioritize and teach them to be comfortable and indeed teach them the importance of saying no. Do not let them get bored. They'll leave you in a heartbeat. Lastly, you do want to recognize them. I know I've said that's extrinsic, and it is, but especially with high performers, they want to know that you recognize that they're high performing. So, this is where actually some intrinsic motivators are super useful. Spot bonuses, stock grants, just company recognition. If your CEO has some kind of thing where they recognize employees every quarter, this is a great way. Make sure that your high performers know that you recognize what they are bringing and that they are appreciated. All right, let's move on to managing low performers. Let me just start by saying none of us want to do this. I mean, unless, I guess some percentage of the population is, has some sort of psychopathic tendency. But for all of us who don't suffer from that disorder, managing low performers is really hard. And a lot of this talk will be about what to do when you have to give up on someone. And the reason I structure this talk on that is that managing someone out is the worst part of the job, and it's something none of us want to do. And so I really feel like it's important to talk about it and learn from each other and try to learn how to get through it. But I want to first acknowledge that none of us want to do this, and everyone that I hire, everyone that I work with, will avoid this as much as possible. But you don't want to avoid it completely, because if you're running a team long enough, it's going to happen. You're going to need to let somebody go. And if you are the type of leader who never does that, you're going to find that that's an anti-pattern and will have negative consequences for your team, your company, and your own career. And in some cases, for the person that you're the low performer themselves. One of my favorite interview questions is to try to get at, does this manager of engineering have a structured approach to this very vexing question? And I will tell you, when I ask this question, most times the answer I get is pretty much made up on the spot. So I would encourage you, those of you who are in leadership or are thinking of moving towards leadership, to start thinking about this. And of course, a lot of the rest of this presentation is giving you a way to think about it. And as always, I like a mental model, and I start with a boundary condition. I have worked at companies where you basically have to do something criminal or be verbally abusive or be completely derelict in your duties to ever risk being fired. If that's one boundary condition here, the other might be Netflix. Famously, they at least have had in the past a approach to performance management, which is basically good enough is goodbye. I will say I'm not comfortable with either of these. They feel a little extreme. So the questions become, how do we find that kind of middle path? How do we find that middle road? Well, I'm going to suggest 3 paradigms. And my point isn't that you all should use one of these paradigms. What I'm hoping is that they'll trigger your own thinking so you can create your own approach. If nothing else, if you're ever interviewing with me, you'll be ready for my interview question. But also, as managers, we are accountable. And I will say, for much of my career, when I have a boss tell me I'm accountable for something, I think that means something kind of bad. But actually, the dictionary definition of accountable is just that you can't make willy-nilly or just random decisions. You need to be able to explain yourself. And even if you've made a mistake, and mistakes happen, given that you've thought through, you've got a mental model, that will allow you to tweak your mental model based on that mistake. This is certainly the definition of accountability I use with my own team. So, all right, let's start with the simplest model I'm going to offer towards thinking about when to give up on a low performer. And that's just, again, back to those level specific expectations that you've hopefully already created. If you've got someone who is underperforming them, it ought to be possible, at least subjectively, to kind of track their progress towards raising their level so they can meet those expectations. And, obviously, if at some point you don't see the lines converge, that maybe is one way to go, well, all right, we need to move on to the performance improvement plan and, some real hard conversations. A slightly more complicated model that sort of builds on the previous one is the classic performance and potential 2x2. Obviously, if you have someone in the lower left quadrant and they don't show you any signs that they can move out of this, again, relative to level, that may kind of make your mind up for you. The way I tend to approach this is that I need to balance the needs of the individual, the team, and the company. And to me, that feels a little different than my role as a father or as a son. Within a family, right? No one is ever left behind. But in a team, especially a professional sports team that's trying to compete, sometimes you've got to make hard decisions. And that's because sometimes the interests of the person and the team and the company are not aligned. And that's when you have to make kind of hard decisions. This model is nicely tunable to the level of the employee and just your own preferences. Obviously, one way you can think about this is if someone is just consistently dragging down the performance of the team, and again, with coaching, with help, with mentors, you don't see that they're on a trend towards at least adequate performance that doesn't decrease the overall team's ability to execute, that maybe is a time to shift gears. And that's actually honestly how I would approach a more junior employee. For my architect level employees, I have as one of my expectations explicitly that they are making the team better, that they are raising the game of the team. That's obviously a much higher expectation, but it's also a much higher level within the company. And if I have an architect who is not able to communicate well and build consensus and teach and mentor, that may lead to some challenging conversations with that architect. Another kind of tweak on this comes from American baseball, although for all I know, other sports are tracking a similar metric. In baseball, they actually track if I were to go on the open market and just hire a veteran, what would their likely impact on hits per game and errors and catches? Especially if you're in a team that's growing, you probably have a sense of like whether the performance of one of your existing, let's say 3 or 4 year past college employees, how that might map to what would happen if you were to go hire someone just from externally. And if your conclusion is that external person would just be a clearly stronger performer, again, that's just a great place to start a conversation with that struggling employee. We're all, especially now, part of a global competition for jobs, and you're not doing them any favors if you don't let them know, hey dude, it feels to me like if I were to go hire a replacement, they would come in able to do some of the things that you're struggling with. How can we support you to raise your game? All right, couple last things. My second to last slide comes from a wonderful book that I will recommend to all of you called Radical Candor. And from my own experience, you will find, even after you've used your framework and you've said, you know what, I got to shift to managing this person out, you will make excuses to not fire them. I'll talk through my version of 4 of these. And these are all excuses I've heard from people, peers of mine or managers on my own team. Excuse me. First one is that you're always like, they're got to get better. There's that one thing they do really well, or, that one person says really nice things about them. I would encourage you in this case, go back to those expectations, be honest with yourself and the employee. Like, don't let the notion that they'll get there somewhere talk you out of doing the right thing for the team and the company. And as I've said earlier, you're not really doing the employee any favors either. They need to know this. They need to know this feedback. Probably one of the most common I hear from managers I work with is, well, yes, Joe is a low performer, but it's better than not having anybody. This one I really disagree with. Most of us are trying to develop complex adaptive systems that really only work when they're well architected and well engineered. And the demands on our systems and the criticality of our systems and the number of aspects of just human life software engineered systems touch are only growing. And having a low performer on your team is basically tech debt. And indeed, I think what you will find is that a low performer can kind of muddy your understanding of what it's going to take to improve the performance of the team as a whole. And whereas working through the performance improvement plan and having a whole on your team is actually clarifying. It will help you understand what you really need, what skills, what level. Don't let someone's better than nobody talk you out of this. Sometimes what a low performer needs is a new role, right? They're just in the wrong role. And that can be a wonderful outcome. That can be one of those times when we have a really positive ending working with a low performer. Just be on the lookout for someone who's constantly changing roles. That's an anti-pattern, and don't be the manager that passes this person on, right? And then another common concern that I hear and that I've had is that, well, if I fire somebody, it's going to freak everybody out. It's going to be bad for morale. Well, I will tell you my own experience. Assuming you've done this in a structured way, you've invested in this low performer, you've given them every benefit of the doubt. My experience is that literally the opposite of this this is true. The feedback I get from my team has almost universally been, thank you. I like working at a company that has high standards, and I like being on a high performing team. I'll finish with, make sure you acknowledge to yourself, as Mark Andreessen said, the hard thing about hard things. This is one of the hard things. You need to be intentional about processing your own emotions, because you're going to have them. And if you don't give yourself the headspace, if you don't take time to meditate or exercise or take your dogs for a walk or do your hobby or I don't know, have a glass of wine in the evening and talk it over with a friend or your spouse, you're going to find that your job is much harder and that you could burn out. And also you'll find that it's harder to have compassion. And you want to find a place to acknowledge that while, even though this person maybe isn't right for your team, they are still a valuable human. And we should have compassion for them. And that is my last slide. I'm really looking forward to your questions, and I want to thank you so much for giving me this opportunity.
Super cool. Thank you so much, Chris. That's a very insightful talk as always. And we see a bunch of comments actually from the live audience. We have some people who are actually some familiar names actually. Hello Virginie. Hello Coach Rai, Guan. Hello Kang, and a few others that we might have missed. Cool. Sounds good. So maybe we can start off with some of the pre-submitted questions. And of course, if you have any questions for Chris, please feel free to post it in the live chat, and we'll try our best to accommodate as much as possible. So one of the pre-submitted question comes in this form. So in a company, it's always a mixed bag whenever you give feedbacks. Some people work well with others, but not everyone. So how are you able to evaluate people fairly, whether they're a high performer or not?
Well, I guess I'll return to write down your values and competencies, agree to them as a team, and then it should be, yes, it'll be somewhat subjective, but it should be, you should be in a place to be able to say, I expect a new college grad to be able to work in a single language and take simple cards with some mentoring and knock it out in a couple days, right? And you can go on from there. I think this is why I keep coming back. In my deck, there's a link to this guy, Sam Salachi's The Rubric. Sam is actually a former Google manager who, while at Box, came up with what he called the rubric, which is basically this idea of levels. I would encourage you all to go check out that article. It has a lot of great advice for exactly this question. Although I agree with the spirit of it. Feedback can be a mixed bag. This is why I think as leaders, we should be focused on how to coach, because it's much easier to do it poorly than do it well.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, we have some questions from the audience. So let me display them on the screen. So we have this one question from Invi99. His question is about, so what would you say about the case where management, for example, a people manager who actually make subordinates the low performance instead? So that means kind of like the management style causing people to be low performance. I'm guessing that's what the question is asking.
Yeah, that's my read of it too. You gotta, that person should not be a manager. I've actually seen this, right? And you gotta address this quickly. The expectations for people managers is really, really high, especially frontline people managers. The unit of work The people who are actually doing the work in our companies are individual contributors. And if you have a manager who is bringing down the performance of a team, that needs to be noticed and addressed very quickly. They either need to stop managing or they need to be let go.
Maybe a bit of a follow-up. So from the perspective of the individual that's being managed, how should they perhaps, or what would your opinion be like on how they should react in this case?
Yeah, so that is tough, right? Where if you feel like your manager is having a negative impact on the team and of course on you. It's obviously a very delicate situation. I would encourage someone in this situation to just acknowledge that this sucks and they've got to feel some emotion about it. You got to process that, because you're going to want to start to have some conversations that are not emotional. Because if you are perceived as emotional when trying to make the point you're trying to make here, it will diminish your ability to get your point across. So hopefully, you can work through these natural emotions and then start to say, well, what can I objectively say? Was there a management change and the team measurably stopped performing in some way? Or have good people quit? Or, I mean, in some ways this could be like mutiny on the bounty. But, you may want to sound out some of your colleagues and see if there is a consensus about this person, right? But again, don't appear to be doing a mutiny. Try to keep it, oriented on the business, oriented on the outcomes, oriented on engineering velocity and quality, and try, if you can, first try to give some feedback to the manager. I know this is super scary, but if you can make the feedback real, as sort of calm and kind of specific as possible. When you do this, it creates a sense of fear, and I feel like you're not getting the best ideas. When you ask us to do more than we can handle, we get stretched too thin and we start dropping balls. Shouldn't we follow the agile precept of one sprint goal per sprint? Why are there one sprint goal per person, right? Try to identify specific anti-patterns that you feel like the manager is exhibiting. Talk to them first. If that doesn't work, you're going to have to go to either a peer or their boss. And boy, that's scary. But if you're right, the company will really thank you for it.
That was a very insightful answer. Thanks for that. Yeah.
All right, we do have a lot of further questions. Let's look at I think it's Yang Chi. Oh, sorry if I butchered your name. So the question is, what if you work at a young startup and replacing low performers is difficult? It can be difficult to hire new people when you're still not as famous as Salesforce.
So I have two answers to this. First off, I would say this is an example of one of those you'll talk yourself out of it examples I gave, right? I'm better off with them. At least they're taking a few cards. I mean, and obviously, yeah, there's some contextuality here. But I will say, if they truly are a low performer, you are better off firing them, especially as a small company. You are being performance managed by the venture capital firms. You're being performance managed by the market. If you're really a tiny startup, you don't really have time to be coaching up a low performer. And they're just going to create tech debt and slow you down. So think long and hard about whether the few cards they're knocking out and the quality of the cards they're knocking out each sprint are really worth keeping them around for. Now, recruiting as a startup is something I spent the last 10 years doing. And I will tell you, I never pulled anyone out of Google until I got to Salesforce. It is so hard to compete against FANG. And hell, Salesforce isn't even part of FANG, and I couldn't compete with Salesforce. But I did. generally you need to make a case about more opportunity to learn, more opportunity to use the latest and greatest cool technologies. You need to make a case for faster career growth. And I found it helpful to acknowledge that, look, at times in our career, we want to maximize learning. Other times we want to maximize compensation. Maybe when we're younger, it's time to go work at a startup and you're going to wear tons of hats. You're going to get to do product management. You're going to get to do project management. You're going to get to go out and meet customers. You're going to get to do things that big companies just naturally are more siloed. So you got to sell the experience, sell the learning, sell the career growth. And you may as well just acknowledge, yeah, you're going to get an offer from those companies. It's probably going to pay you more. And so you can say, look, maybe then down the road, you got a kid, you got a mortgage, you got college coming up. Maybe then you take all the great learning and all the great skills you develop at the small company and you go to the big company. And who knows, maybe along the way you hit a home run and you have a company bought by Google and then you're in good shape. So.
Cool, thank you.
Okay, so we have another question also by Xiang Qi. All right, so this is also a very interesting question. Do you have any tips towards, in the case of a company building, or even in a team building a good culture, and getting that team to streamline along the operation of trust and respect of each other?
In my experience, culture is surprisingly top-down. This is one of the reasons why I, as a leader, spend so much time reading. It's why Julius and I met at this Plato event. It's why I spend so much time trying to learn from peers, because ultimately, how I carry myself is it clearly just permeates through the org. And when I worked at small companies, culture tended to start with the CEO. So it's not necessarily the best thing you want to hear, because to a certain extent, if you want good culture, choose the right leader. And then as a leader, I feel like we could do a whole talk on just this question. So maybe rather what I would say is study. And then trust and respect, man, that is psychological safety. That is, transparency. That is, being good to your word. That is, ability to have hard conversations. Yeah, hopefully that helps.
Okay, let's move on to another question. Okay, so this is actually a callback to your discussion, your sharing from earlier on. So just curious on this, which is, I think it's for high performance. So I've met people who are high performers as well. And I do agree, yeah, it's hard to be able to say no. Like you have that, that you're used to saying like yes. It's not easy to transit into saying no. So like from the company's perspective or from a manager, how do you actually cultivate them to be able to learn to say no?
By complete coincidence, in one of my one-on-ones this week, I was having this exact conversation with a high-performing manager on my team. And let me not use too much recency bias, but I'll start with that. In this person's case, I was able to take a non-directive approach. And so I was really happy that I didn't have to tell them that they need to learn to say no. I asked them why they're feeling so thin. I tried to, and sure enough, they said, I hate to disappoint people. I never say no. I just say yes to everything. And it's making me feel like inadequate and like I'm letting people down. So the way I approached it, and this is just one technique you can use, was I said, well, what? I tell you what, the nice thing about life is that these things just keep coming up over and over again. Someone's going to ask you for something soon. I'm going to ask you for something soon. I'm not going to tell you to say no. What I'm going to ask you to do is, before you say yes, notice that this question has come up again. Take a minute and ask yourself, what would it feel like to say no? What are the fears? What are the concerns? What little sting do you get? And then lean into that. Before you say yes, you're probably going to say yes. It's fine to say yes, but just use this as an opportunity for self-knowledge. What are you scared of? What's your negative prediction? What do you imagine will happen if you say no? I would counter that coaching with also, you cannot succeed in this business without learning to say no. I would argue it is one of the most important skills. You are going to say no to more things than you say yes to. Indeed, part of what gets leaders ahead is figuring out what to prioritize and what to push to the side.
Cool, thanks, Chris. So also you just mentioned about the recency bias. I think not everyone fully understand what that means. Can you share a bit more about what you meant by it?
You know, I see this in myself. I see this in leaders all the time. You ask me, what's the most important thing for my team to be working on? And if you ask me right after we had an outage because our automated testing didn't catch something, I'm going to say, we need to invest more in automated testing. But then, you know, same day, if I'm on a call, you know, with the sales team and they're saying, we've got to get this feature out or we're going to lose this big deal. And suddenly I say, we screw testing. We got to get that feature out so we can win the deal. That's called recency bias. And it's something that is, as leaders and just frankly as humans, you want to be aware of. It's really easy to exhibit recency bias.
Sounds good. Thank you so much. We do have another question from Chester this time. So his question is, how do you screen out low performers at the candidate selection process? How do you avoid picking a highly qualified individual who just fails to take initiative to upskill?
I'm going to admit a bias that I have that this question brings up to me, but it is a bias based on 20 years in this industry. Software engineers with PhDs are rarely high performing. Not never, but boy, I will tell you, for some reason, people who go all the way and get a research PhD are not happy with the fact that our job is a craft. You know, I agree with those who say that the right mental model for a software engineering team is a manufacturing line. But I digress. You're asking a more specific question. You know, again, I mean, dude, this question could be its own talk. Like this is hard. I will tell you some of the things that influence me. There's a great book called How Google Works. It has a long section on how Google applied a real kind of continual learning approach to their hiring process. And they came up with a really structured process that I ended up bringing a version of to most of the companies that I work at. I would encourage you to read that. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I have a quick answer here. This is hard. Expect, no matter how good your process is, you're going to have to manage some of the people you hire out. So.
Awesome. Okay, we have another interesting question. Again, towards managing. Okay, so would you mind sharing about example of a low performer that you had to manage? And maybe, yeah, if you have like some sort of framework or what you did in terms of being able to manage low performers.
Sure. So, all right, we'll say, what's a name that nobody has anymore? Mortimer. Say I had an employee named Mortimer. Morty and I were working together. You know, one example would be, you know, someone I had who sort of consistently would get their work done, but anytime anyone had to interact with them, it went poorly. You know, they came away feeling attacked or diminished. got to where people didn't want to interact with him. There's a stereotype of the kind of grumpy software developer. The truth is, what we do is a form of collaborative knowledge work. Yeah, it is always the case. If you can get a task done with a single person, you should do that. It's always, as soon as you add another person, you have, overhead. You have shared context. But the systems we're building cannot be created, maintained, and extended by a single person. So collaboration, cooperation, communication skills are extremely important in modern software engineering. So the grumpy developer, there is less and less a need for that person. So I was forced to go to Morty and say, look, grumpy Morty, that maybe is okay, but angry Morty, that's not okay. And people are starting to avoid you. I will say I have one example of this where I actually was pretty confident we could turn this person around, and I ended up taking him out to dinner. Bought him a bottle of wine, put it on my own card, not the company card, and I gave him some really tough feedback, more specific than I'm bringing here. And it worked. It flipped him. It was a rough night for him, but I ended up actually seeing his wife at a company party and getting like a huge thank you. Like for whatever reason, Morty needed a little bit of a kick in the pants. Yeah, that can happen too.
Thanks for the story about Morty. Kang, I can't believe it. No one's gonna name his child Morty anymore. We have there's an interesting follow-up question to that, which is feedback is something that for us Asians we are not very good at. Asians, we are social harmony is very important in Asia, and so we tend to get a lot of these things kind of just slip by. So do you have any tips about how we can provide more forceful feedback to sort of like turn a person around?
I have a personality type that's called anxiously attached, which means I really fear disconnection. I really fear anything I might do that might cause someone to not like me. So I think for different reasons than maybe cultural, I too struggle with giving feedback. Couple things that can really help. Before giving feedback, ask questions. Ask authentic questions. Like if your feedback is, I don't know, what's an example of some feedback we might give each other? If feedback is, sometimes I get lost in your explanation and I don't understand the point you're making. Ideally, there's a notion in leadership of a coachable moment. If that's your feedback, right? That you have these long meandering explanations and I lose track, especially if this happened publicly in a meeting, wait till you're one-on-one or when you're one-on-one. But rather than giving that feedback, I was lost. Say, could you help me understand, kind of the bullet point version of that? What was the right? What was the kind of one or two things you wanted me to take away from that? Right? That isn't even so much feedback as a request, as a question. And then if they say, well, I just meant X, Y, and Z, then I feel like you're already in a little bit safer place to make your next feedback, which was, well, my perception. And again, when you couch feedback as an I statement, by the way, this works in your personal relationships too. When you complain without criticizing, when you say, the first time you explained that, I just felt lost. I didn't understand. That second time was much clearer. Right? I think that lands. It also feels safer to say. You're not saying they're bad at communication. right? You're saying, I struggle to understand. There's a wonderful thing called the Gottman Institute that has relationship advice, and a ton of it applies at work. By the way, I recommend it to you.
Super awesome. Thank you so much. I think to kind of add to that also, Bowen had a somewhat similar question. So when measuring potential, right, how do you avoid it being a self-fulfilling prophecy for the employee's future in the company?
I think what you're asking here is, or maybe I'll put this as a statement. If we invest more in our high performers, don't we guarantee they do better? Right?
Yep.
You know what? I'll start with an answer, which is, if you've correctly identified them, even if it is a self-fulfilling prophecy, that's time well spent. You need high performers. The rest of the team needs high performers. I think the challenge is that correct identification. If you're investing a bunch of time in your more middling, kind of middle of the pack folks, yes, they'll do better because of your attention, possibly. I will say I like this question because I think we should be, as managers, constantly self-doubting and yet still decisive. Constantly test your understanding of reality, constantly test your assumptions, because you don't want to create a self-fulfilling prophecy. Great question.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have another question from our audience. Right, so this is also another very interesting question, touching on, I think, something that's probably a bit more realistic, or more realistic situation, in terms of how much time would you put towards gauging, whether a person is considered a high or low performer, because it's not a binary decision. People can be mostly in the middle as well. And how much time would you give in terms of assessing them as a low performer before you manage them out?
Well, I mean, the time question is contextual, but I didn't include everything that goes into managing low performers. And one thing that I didn't include is that if you have identified someone as a low performer, you start by asking, what's going on? How are you doing? And even if you get everything's fine, see if you can triangulate. See if there's someone, an HR person or someone on the team that they trust. Double check. Because sometimes we hit snags in life. And if someone is struggling with performance because of a family situation, you want to know that, and you want to give them a chance to work through it. Just because we're running a professional sport team doesn't mean they can't carry people for a while. So totally agree with this question. How much time I would give is contextual. And if there is a challenge, a personal challenge, that would absolutely change how long I would give them.
Super cool. Thank you so much, Chris. I have a different question. I guess kind of follow up to one thing that you mentioned earlier, which is that you mentioned that as a manager, you need to question your own assumptions, but then also there's a flip side to it whereby you might appear to be, indecisive, ineffective. Like, how do you kind of balance it?
With balance, it's helpful to think about boundary conditions again. I really like a thing I learned years and years ago, this notion of disagree and commit, which is you get a group together, everybody has strong opinions, you make your best decision if necessary. Sometimes an architect or a manager has to break a tie and say, here's what we're going to do. And then everyone needs to just disagree and commit to the plan of action. And I feel like I use that with myself. Give myself a chance to be indecisive, to have doubt, to look at things from multiple sides, and then make a decision. Disagree and commit with myself. It is a balance. I will say I probably err on the side of vulnerability. I admit to my team that I am indecisive, that this could go both ways. I think we need to try this. One thing that helps me be decisive, though, is to say, look, we need to be continually learning. And that means this decision isn't forever. Let's test this decision. If you disagree with it, the best thing you can do is to commit to it and help us figure out that it's wrong. Bring data, right? We will reevaluate.
Thanks for the answer. So, okay, I have another related question, or somewhat related in terms of the message of learning, and also related to one of the earlier questions in terms of being able to develop performers. So, in this question, in companies, we see senior junior pairing as buddies. That's one of the ways to keep that stream of experience going from top to bottom. Are there any other tips you can suggest in terms of being able to sort of nurture and train employees to become high performers?
Sure. First off, I want to say pair programming is something I think I really value. I think it creates better systems. You can do fewer pull request reviews because you already have two eyes on everything. I always do pair interviewing. Interviewing is itself a skill, and pair up your junior and seniors during the interviews, and they learn from each other. I'll offer one other way, though, in addition to pair programming. Build a culture that takes mentoring and mentorship really seriously, and values mentoring as a skill you expect in your senior employees. There's a book I recommend called The Manager's Path. It has a whole chapter on mentoring, and I require all of my mentors to read it. When we have a new hire on my team, I tell the new hire and the mentor that for the first 5 to 6 weeks of that new hire's career, the mentor's number one outcome is the success of the new hire, above anything else on their plate. Again, go slow to go fast. Getting someone off to a bad start is terrible. It causes problems. It can derail someone's career at that company. Getting someone off to a good start is just compound interest. It's just going to make you better and better and better. So get your mentors together. You have communities of practice around mentorship. Talk about what makes a good mentor. Get people to bring in ideas and challenges. Mentoring should not be just an afterthought. It should be something you take very, very seriously.
I think that's a really great answer. I have a slight follow-up for that question. In terms of, let's say within your organization, within your teams, how do you highlight, or rather basically pick out people who you feel would become great mentors? I know you mentioned about getting the different mentors together and get them to discuss and understand whether the strategies are going well. But in the case of before that, how do you find out if someone has actually the ability, to be able to step into that role?
So back to my earlier answer about we do collaborative knowledge work. That means that past a certain level of seniority, I expect everyone to be able to mentor. Because mentorship is just a form of teaching, and collaboration requires teaching and learning constantly. How do I know when someone is ready to mentor? Clearly mentorship comes more naturally to some than others. Certainly, people who are more confident kind of holding forth or dominating a meeting probably find mentorship easier than others. But, it's really important to find those introverted types and cultivate them as mentors too, so they can mentor introverted types. How do I know when someone's ready? I don't know if I have a great answer off the top of my head for that. To a certain extent, as someone is getting more senior, in my rubric or in my levels, is that they're starting to teach. They're starting to help. So you should see this ahead of when they're, before someone is declared an official mentor, they should already be doing it unofficially as they get more senior. So you should be looking for this, from the get-go, I would argue.
Okay, so Okay, we have another question here, but so the tone of it will be slightly different, but I think more in tune with actually most of our audience today. Okay, so let me bring the question out. Okay. Okay, I think should try and look for the question, but I can't find this one. Maybe I'll ask it in a bit.
Oh,
Okay, maybe I'll show another question then. Another pre-submitted one is this right here. So some of your staff are probably less upfront about their contributions. They'll just do things silently and never say anything about it. So how do you reward them for it?
that's interesting. Assuming that these folks are on a Scrum team and we're following some form of Scrum, Kanban, or Scrumban, they're, even if they're not the type to trumpet their own accomplishments, their work should be measurable. You should be able to see that they're taking cards and knocking things out. I take this question to mean, what about people who kind of work in the shadows or work in the background and do important work? I'm going to challenge that a little bit. Again, we do collaborative knowledge work. Past a certain level of seniority, you need to be able to be upfront about your contributions because you're working as part of a giant interdependent system. And if people don't know about the work you're doing, they can't respond to it, cooperate, and collaborate with you. Unfortunately, visibility, especially in larger companies, is not really optional. So if you are the type to work in the shadows, I will suggest that is a little bit career limiting. Doesn't necessarily mean you're a low performer, but it may hold you back from reaching certain levels where we've got to start to stitch the whole system together to create valuable customer outcomes.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you so much.
Okay, so I think we have okay, so I found the question over here. Okay, so something that's more, I guess, related to most of us, in terms of how do you, I think, yeah, in the context of any company, how do you make yourself more recognizable, I guess, as a top performer?
Start by making sure you're getting your stuff done. Be reliable. Get done what is asked of you. To be recognized as a top performer, you need to be reliable, right? There are a lot of ways to be recognized as a top performer. One of the ways is to identify a problem that maybe isn't as obvious to everyone else. And then most importantly, don't come and say, I saw a problem. Come and say, I've got an idea, right? A lot of people can poke holes at things and say, this is not going well, or this could go better. But what the top performers do is they come and say, and I have an idea for how we can fix this. That will definitely get you rewarded. And by the way, that isn't always technical, right? You could go to your Scrum Master and go to your team and say, hey, in the retro, I identify this approach that I think is kind of holding us back for this and this reason. Let's try something new and try to help your team become higher performing. I have a colleague here who says every opportunity, challenge, and problem will be addressed through some combination of people, process, and tech. One thing high performers do is start to realize not every problem can be solved with better code. You've also got to address the system, the process, and the people. Help people level up. High performers tend to look at something with a systemic approach and look for ways to make it better in a systemic way that will really be lasting.
That was a really awesome answer. Okay, maybe kind of as a follow-up for that question, or somewhat in a similar light, be for individual as well. And I think since both you and also Julius, I think you all mentioned about your connection with Plato, so I guess this is also a little bit of a connection to there in terms of being able to find like how should I go around finding a mentor and to become a better contributor within the company that I'm at.
So my first mentors were former bosses. I just kept in touch with the ones that I liked, cultivated that relationship, and even if it was just once a year, see if we can get together for breakfast, did it on their time, get together for lunch. I also look for opportunities to go to conferences, which I know is no longer a thing, but in the before times, we used to actually go to conferences, and I would sometimes, there's this one guy that I have as a mentor that I literally he was having a hallway conversation about a topic I was super interested in, and I listened in, I asked him questions, and got to know him and looked him up on LinkedIn and said hi, and he ended up being kind enough to let me come down to Netflix and have lunch with him and ask some questions. And I will say I'm fortunate to count him as a mentor too. I will say this is hard. It's really scary to ask someone to be a mentor. Surprisingly though, most people are super flattered. So one thing I like about Plato is that it's almost like Tinder for finding a mentor. You can be like, I'll try how much I heard. I want to try, right? And they let you and it's all you can eat until you find that person that you click with. So if you can convince your boss to sign up for Plato, that's another way to get yourself a mentor.
Super cool. I think we're almost at the end already. So Waihao has a very interesting question. So the question is, any other books and resources that you would recommend to manage high and low performers?
So many. And I don't know, is there a way to give this link? I actually keep this up to date as I read new things that I love. If there's some way to share that with everyone, I've already mentioned a bunch. The Manager's Path. I love The Fifth Discipline. I love everything by Gene Kim. So the Phoenix Project. I'm currently about halfway through the Unicorn Project, and I could not love it more. The book Accelerate is my Bible. I make everyone read it and read it again. I literally love this book by Marty Kagan so much about how to do good product that I keep it by my desk because I refer to it so often. So there's a few.
Super cool. Thank you so much for the book recommendations. We'll be posting it in the live chat in a while.
Awesome.
All right. Wayne, do you want to take the last one?
Okay, so we can take the last question. So this question is from someone that we know.
Yes. Come here, buddy. Come here. This is Bean. He is actually part Corgi, part Chihuahua. And he's very serious. And he likes to bark. He likes to bark he doesn't like big dogs, doesn't like puppies. He will bark at them. He likes properly sized dogs like him. So that's Bean. Leo, buddy, come here. This is my other dog. This is a Cavalier King Charles Spaniel who was too big to be sold. He did not meet the criteria for a proper King Charles. And he's very driven by food and cat poop and laps. And he just loves a snuggle.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing.
Well, thank you. This was such a pleasure. I poured myself a glass of wine at the start of it, and I am now going to take a sip.
It's super
my week is over.
Wow, it's super awesome to have you, Chris. It's a wealth of knowledge every time we have a conversation with you. Thank you so much for dumping, like so much experience and so much wisdom to us. And we really hope to have you again next time with the culture talk and some of the other ones that you mentioned.
Well, awesome.
Cool.
Yeah, I owe you a blog. It's good. It's good inspiration. I got to get another blog out before I'm ready.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Super
All right.
cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Um,
Take care.
thanks.
Bye.
Bye. So, yeah, thank you once again, everyone. So, just to kind of wrap things up, we are still looking for speakers if you're interested to speak on any of these topics. And of course, if you're an engineering leader in your company and you want to speak in project rework as well, we are more than happy to have you. So, please use the same link to sign up, and we would like to see you next time. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our social media. Um, and that's it. Have an awesome Saturday and see you soon.